Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the mechanics of the visibility belief reset and why your brand's biggest bottleneck is your belief that you aren't ready to be seen.
That is really the core of it, isn't it?
It really is. So I want you to think about the most intelligent founder you know, like the one with the absolute most revolutionary product or service out there.
Right. We all know at least one person like that.
Exactly. Now consider this really uncomfortable mathematical reality. A creator with, say, half their intelligence and a significantly messier marketing strategy is almost certainly beating them in the market right now.
Oh, without a doubt. It happens every single day.
Yeah. So today we are analyzing a curated stack of internal case studies, behavioral data, and psychological frameworks to figure out why. Our mission for this session is discovering exactly why your biggest obstacle to growth isn't a social media algorithm, it's not a flawed content matrix, and it's definitely not market saturation.
Yeah.
The bottleneck is you.
Yeah, and that reality is precisely where we need to focus our attention today. We have to place the analytical lens directly on the internal architecture of the founder.
Right, instead of the external architecture of the internet.
Exactly, because when we look at the historical data sets, right, and we observe the long-term patterns of who actually establishes a sustained, profitable presence online versus who perpetually struggles in obscurity, the differentiating factor is practically never technical capability. It's just not.
Wait, really? It's never the technical side.
Very rarely. It is almost always psychological readiness. We spend millions of dollars in the business world optimizing the external machinery.
Right, the funnels, the ad copy.
Exactly, completely ignoring the fact that the operator's internal belief system is what ultimately controls the throttle.
Well, yeah. And that brings us directly to the core tension we are examining today. We are looking at this stark difference between what founders think is holding them back, which is usually this, like grand strategic illusion, and what is actually causing the friction.
Which is their own restrictive belief system.
Right, because the source material we compiled makes a very definitive, uncompromising statement. It states clearly that the primary barriers to audience growth are not technical.
Right.
Like, visibility challenges do not originate from algorithm updates. They don't stem from your choice of platform, and they don't come from a less than perfect marketing funnel.
No, they don't. They are generated entirely by the internal assumptions a founder carries about what it actually means to be seen by the public.
Yeah, which requires a pretty massive paradigm shift for most operators, I would think.
Yeah.
Especially those trained in, traditional corporate environments.
Oh, absolutely. Because we are heavily conditioned to look outward for the point of friction when a metric is underperforming. Right?
Yeah, like who broke the machine?
Exactly. If website traffic is low or a campaign fails to convert, the immediate assumption is that the external mechanism is broken.
Right. The team assumes the platform updated its terms of service.
Or the algorithmic distribution model deprioritized their specific content format.
Yeah, or the time of day they posted was suboptimal.
Right, exactly. We look literally everywhere except at the foundational belief that drove the creation of the content in the first place.
So let me analyze why founders default to that specific behavior. Because there is a very obvious psychological safety net at play here, right?
Oh, for sure.
Blaming an algorithm feels incredibly safe. If the algorithm is the enemy, then you, as the founder, are simply a victim of circumstances completely beyond your control.
Right. It entirely removes the burden of personal accountability.
Yes. You can just sit in a boardroom and tell yourself, well, my ideas are objectively brilliant, my brand is revolutionary, but the algorithm just doesn't favor my brilliance this quarter.
It's a very convenient scapegoat.
Exactly. But examining a limiting belief, on the other hand, requires massive accountability. It forces you to look in the mirror and admit that the obstacle isn't, a line of code in Silicon Valley.
No, the obstacle is your own hesitation. It's your fear of judgment. And that is the exact mechanism of ego protection at work. Psychologists actually refer to this through the concept of the locus of control.
Okay, locus of control. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so when a founder externalizes the blame, shifting their locus of control outward to an algorithm, they protect their ego, but they simultaneously surrender their agency.
Wow. They surrender their agency.
Exactly. And what we see from a strategic perspective is that this externalization creates a perpetual compounding state of delay.
Because they're waiting for the external factors to be perfect.
Right. The false assumption constantly operating in the background of their mind is that one must be perfectly established or perfectly optimized before showing up consistently.
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
You know, a founder will say, I cannot launch this new initiative until my team completely understands how the new artificial intelligence distribution algorithms work.
Right. Or I need to finalize my entire 12-month content matrix before I hit publish on my first post.
Exactly. They are using complex strategy as a highly sophisticated form of procrastination.
That is so true. Let's ground that in a physical reality.
Mm.
Because obsessing over these distribution models and perfectly polished strategies while holding on to a restrictive belief that you aren't ready, it kind of reminds me of a hyper-engineered race car.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Imagine a Formula One team, right? They spend millions of dollars and countless months designing a car. They test it in a state-of-the-art wind tunnel.
Right, optimizing everything.
Exactly. They tweak the aerodynamics to the millimeter, they calibrate the suspension perfectly, and all the computer simulations say it is the fastest machine ever built. But they refuse to take it out of the garage and put it on the actual asphalt.
Wow. Yeah.
And why? Because the wind tunnel is a perfectly controlled environment. On the track, there is crosswind. There is sudden rain.
There's gravel kicked up by other drivers.
Exactly. The simulation didn't account for reality. And silence is essentially a wind tunnel. You have this perfectly simulated brand in a Google Doc generating absolutely zero actual velocity.
That analogy maps perfectly to the realities of the digital landscape. I mean, the garage or the wind tunnel is your private drafting document. It's your endless internal strategy meetings, your closed-door branding workshops.
Right.
And the track is the public timeline. And the crucial element of your analogy is that a race car sitting in a garage, no matter how flawlessly tuned and mathematically perfect, is generating zero velocity.
Nothing. It's sitting still.
Right. It is technically perfect, but functionally useless. It's interacting with zero variables, which means it is learning absolutely nothing about the actual conditions of the race.
I want to push back on that application for a moment, though.
Sure.
Because I know there are founders listening right now who are fiercely protective of their brand equity.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a purely operational standpoint, isn't a flawed strategy technically worse than having no visibility at all?
That's a common fear, but no.
Well, let me just play devil's advocate. If you take that car out onto the track with a misaligned engine, you crash. If you go to the market with a messy, unrefined message, couldn't you permanently damage your brand's reputation?
Right. I see where you're going with this.
I mean, we all know the classic business case studies of executives who made a single public misstep and wiped billions off their company's valuation. Doesn't strategic silence at least protect the asset until it is fully bulletproof?
Yeah. And that right there is the exact logical trap that keeps brilliant founders entirely invisible.
Really? A trap?
Yes. To answer your question directly, no, a flawed strategy is absolutely not worse than having no visibility. Let's look at the mechanics of why that is true and differentiate between a catastrophic PR failure and the normal friction of market testing.
Okay, let's break that down.
A strategy, by its very definition, cannot be tested, it cannot be measured, and it cannot be refined without a baseline of continuous presence.
So you need a baseline.
Exactly. Silence yields zero data. When an executive ruins a company with a public misstep, it is usually because they insulted their audience or violated a core ethical boundary.
Right. It's a massive behavioral failure.
Right. It's not because the lighting in their video was poor or their thesis was slightly unstructured.
Oh, I see. So you are saying we conflate the risk of being a little messy with the risk of total reputational destruction.
Yes, exactly. If you execute a flawed marketing strategy and you post consistently, the market will tell you it's flawed.
They'll definitely tell you.
Right. You'll see low engagement metrics. You'll get clarifying questions from your audience in the comments. You'll notice which specific elements of your value proposition are just falling flat.
Yeah, the feedback is immediate.
And that is not brand destruction. That is data acquisition.
Yeah.
You can take that negative feedback, adjust the strategy, and iterate. You are steering a moving ship.
Right. Whereas silence
gives you nothing. You cannot optimize a vacuum. You cannot iterate on something that does not exist in the public sphere.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the root cause of choosing silence is almost always a restrictive belief regarding the founder's own worthiness. It's just heavily disguised as a need for clarity or a need to protect the brand.
I see. So the founder tells their team, I am just waiting for absolute clarity on our messaging framework before we launch this personal branding push.
Right.
But what they are actually communicating on a psychological level is, I am terrified to be perceived by my peers when I am still figuring things out.
Exactly. And the demand for perfect clarity before execution is an operational impossibility.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't. Clarity does not precede visibility. Clarity is the direct result of visibility. It is forged through interaction.
Okay, so if we have firmly established that the bottleneck is an internal belief rather than an external strategy issue, we need to examine exactly what this looks like in practice for a founder logging onto their computer on a Tuesday morning.
Let's do it.
Because the source material provides a very precise microstory to analyze here, and it perfectly deconstructs this phenomenon. I was looking at this fascinating account earlier about a founder who completely ghosted her own audience for months.
Yes, let's dissect the mechanics of that specific client microstory. The notes outline a situation where a highly competent professional stayed silent, literally refusing to communicate with her market for months, specifically because she held the belief that her message wasn't strong enough yet.
Wow.
She was trapped in a cognitive cycle of waiting for the day she would finally feel qualified to speak on her topic.
That phrase, "wasn't strong enough yet," is incredibly insidious.
It really is.
Because it sounds like a rigorous professional standard, right? It sounds like someone taking their craft seriously. But functionally, it operates as a locked door.
Absolutely.
What does strong enough even mean in an objective, measurable sense is an entirely imaginary threshold.
Yeah.
We call this the trap of waiting for permission. This founder was paralyzed because she was waiting for some external authority or perhaps some internal feeling of absolute, unshakable certainty to grant her the right to take up space on a platform.
And that trap of waiting for permission is a hallmark of the belief bottleneck. When a founder operates under the subconscious assumption that they must pass an invisible qualification exam before they can share their insights, they essentially guarantee their own irrelevance.
Because they never post.
Right. And the critical turning point in this microstory was not that she suddenly achieved absolute perfection.
Right.
She didn't disappear into a cabin, write a flawless manifesto that solved all of her industry's core problems, and emerge fully actualized.
Right. She didn't suddenly acquire a new doctorate, and the platform didn't send her a verified badge granting her permission to speak.
Exactly. The turning point was entirely cognitive, and it was surprisingly simple. She asked a new question.
Which was?
What if sharing as I grow is exactly what people need from me?
Oh, wow. I want to hover over the practical implications of that specific question for a moment. What if sharing as I grow is exactly what people need from me?
It's powerful.
It completely reorients the power dynamic between the founder and the audience. It shifts the entire burden of communication.
How so?
Well, it moves away from the traditional authoritative model of, I must be the flawless expert on the mountaintop, handing down finalized tablets of stone, and transitions to a collaborative model. I am a practitioner who is a few steps ahead of you on this path, and I am willing to narrate my journey and my mistakes as I make them.
And that is the exact mechanism of the belief reset. By adopting that exploratory narrative stance, she completely neutralized the imaginary threshold of qualification.
Yeah, she just bypassed it completely.
Exactly. And what I really want to emphasize here, because this is perhaps the most profound realization from the data, is that absolutely nothing external changed in her environment.
Zero external changes.
Zero. The audience demographic didn't shift. The macroeconomic conditions didn't change. The platform's distribution algorithm remained exactly the same as it was the day prior.
Wow.
The only variable that shifted was her internal belief regarding her own visibility. That single, isolated, internal cognitive shift catalyzed her first consistent week of posting in several months.
That's incredible.
Changing the belief fundamentally changes the entire operational rhythm of a business.
It is remarkable how binary the physical output is based on an internal state. The belief changes, the restriction is lifted, the action flows.
Exactly.
But let me test this framework from the perspective of our listeners. How do you actually separate this? If I am a founder listening right now, how do I recognize when I'm confusing having high professional standards with active self-sabotage?
That's the big question.
Because no executive wants to admit they are self-sabotaging. We all want to believe we just have uncompromisingly high standards for our brand.
Of course.
If I refuse to post a video because the audio has an echo, or because I feel the lighting diminishes the professional look of the brand, am I not just protecting the asset? Where is the objective line between a standard and an excuse?
That is a vital operational distinction, and it comes down to observing the ultimate outcome of the behavior over a measured timeline.
Okay.
Standards dictate how you build something. Self-sabotage dictates whether you build it at all.
Let's expand on that. How does that look in practice?
Well, if you genuinely have high standards, you might require that your audio quality is crisp, that your arguments are rigorously researched, and that your formatting is clean.
Right.
Those standards will force you to buy a better microphone, spend an extra hour on research, and hire a proofreader. But you still ultimately publish the material. The standard elevates the execution of the deliverable.
It makes the final product better.
Exactly. However, if your standard results in a 3-month period of total silence, because the lighting wasn't quite right, or the thesis didn't feel universally groundbreaking, that is no longer a standard. That is a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Waiting for a feeling of permission that never arrives, heavily disguised as a commitment to excellence, is a primary symptom of restrictive beliefs. High standards produce high-quality output. Self-sabotage produces zero output.
I really like that metric. If your pursuit of excellence results in an absolute zero in terms of production, you're not actually pursuing excellence. You are just hiding.
Yep, you're protecting yourself.
You are protecting yourself from the vulnerability of market feedback. I actually remember a period where I spent 3 weeks scripting a 2-minute promotional video.
3 weeks for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I kept rewriting the copy because I felt I didn't sound authoritative enough for the demographic I was targeting. I was constantly tweaking words, re-recording audio. I finally posted this highly manufactured piece of content, and it got absolute crickets.
Of course it did.
A week later, out of sheer frustration, I posted a raw, unedited thought I had while sitting in my car. It generated over 100 detailed replies. The standard I was enforcing in the first video was actually just me trying to build armor against criticism.
Your anecdote perfectly illustrates the shift we are discussing. The moment a founder realizes they are hiding behind that imaginary threshold of readiness, it reveals a fundamental mechanical truth about how a brand actually builds an audience in the modern economy.
Right.
It is a truth that completely upends the traditional legacy corporate concept of readiness.
Which transitions us perfectly into the mechanics of momentum. The source material establishes a non-negotiable core rule regarding this dynamic. It says, visibility emerges through repetition, not readiness.
Repetition, not readiness. This concept flies directly in the face of everything taught in legacy business programs.
Oh, totally.
The traditional model dictates that you spend 2 years developing a product or a brand in absolute secrecy, refining every edge until you execute a massive, coordinated public launch.
The grand reveal.
Yes.
We treat visibility like a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for a finished skyscraper. The developers invite the press, the mayor is there with big golden scissors, the building is totally complete down to the lobby furniture, the windows are washed, and you cut the ribbon.
Exactly.
The expectation is that everything must be flawless before the public is allowed to even look at the structure.
Yeah.
But the data we are reviewing suggests we should be treating visibility not like a ribbon-cutting ceremony, but like the daily, mundane habit of laying bricks.
That's a perfect visual. The ribbon cutting is a singular, high-stakes event. Laying bricks is a compounding, iterative process.
Right.
It mirrors the shift in the software industry from waterfall development, where you build the entire program before releasing it, to agile development, where you release a minimum viable product and iterate based on user feedback.
Yeah, we've seen that shift everywhere.
Founders falsely believe they must earn the right to be seen by reaching an arbitrary level of readiness, the finished building. The reality, both mathematically in terms of algorithms and socially in terms of human trust, is that the act of showing up is the mechanism that generates readiness.
But if readiness is generated entirely by the action itself, does being ready even technically exist as a prerequisite?
That's a fascinating philosophical question.
If readiness is a constantly moving target that only advances when we take action and receive feedback, can anyone ever truly say, I am now objectively ready to start?
Analytically speaking, no. Readiness in the context of visibility is a complete myth.
A myth.
It is a cognitive distortion created by the brain to prevent you from taking social risks. The text brings us to a really fascinating concept. Visibility becomes possible the precise moment you stop believing you aren't ready.
Wow.
This implies that the state of being ready is entirely subjective and self-appointed.
You point yourself ready simply by deciding the wait is over. The action precedes the feeling.
Exactly. From a mechanical standpoint, you do not get ready to be seen. You are seen, and therefore you get ready. Repetition forces evolution.
I want to make sure you, the listener, really absorb that sequence. You are seen, and therefore you get ready. It runs counter to all our biological instincts, doesn't it?
It completely contradicts them.
Because our primal instinct is, I prepare, I gather resources, I ensure my environment is safe, and then I allow myself to be seen. You are arguing the opposite.
Yes.
I allow myself to be seen, the market reacts, I adapt to that reaction, and that forced adaptation is what actually makes me ready for the next level of growth.
Yes. Let's examine the mechanics of how repetition forces evolution. When you commit to presence over readiness, you post an insight. It might be slightly unrefined,
Sure.
but the very act of articulating it publicly forces your brain to clarify the concept. An audience member asks a clarifying question in the comments.
And that forces you to think.
Right. That question forces you to consider a counter-argument you hadn't thought of. Your subsequent post addresses that angle. Over a period of 30 days, through the sheer force of repetition and market friction, your messaging becomes razor sharp. You didn't get sharp sitting in a vacuum in your office. You got sharp in the arena, grinding against actual market conditions.
The friction of the market acts as the whetstone. You cannot sharpen a blade without grinding it against something hard and real.
Exactly.
Which means we have to completely abandon the pursuit of being flawless. Understanding that repetition creates visibility forces us to redefine what we are actually trying to achieve when we open our laptops to communicate.
Right.
If the goal isn't to prove how smart or perfect we are, what exactly is the technical objective of our communication?
The source text gives us a very precise technical directive here. It demands a complete shift in terminology and expectation. We are instructed to replace the operating directive, I need to be flawless, with the directive, I need to be present.
Present.
The audience doesn't require a founder to be flawless. They require them to be findable.
Findable. That is such a specific, grounded, and almost relieving word. Not remarkable, not visionary, not historically profound, just findable.
Yep, just findable.
If you aren't findable, the quality of your intellect does not matter at all. Let's analyze the technical difference between those two states, being polished versus being present, because they feel very different internally to the creator and they're received entirely differently by the consumer.
They operate on entirely different psychological frequencies. Let's define the parameters of polish first.
Okay.
Polish implies a static, completed state. Think of a museum exhibit. You are looking at an artifact behind reinforced glass. It is perfectly lit, it has a little placard explaining its historical importance, and its state is finalized.
Right.
It cannot be questioned, it cannot be altered, and most importantly, it cannot be interacted with. You observe it, but you do not engage with it.
Yeah, you don't walk up to the Mona Lisa and suggest to the curator that she should smile a little wider. It is done. It is closed off from collaboration.
Now, contrast that static state with presence. Presence implies an active, dynamic, ongoing conversation. It is not locked behind glass.
It's in the room with you.
Right. It is in the room with you. It is capable of responding, shifting, and evolving in real time based on the energy of the interaction.
If we extrapolate how modern audiences interact with brands, this distinction becomes the entire ballgame. A highly polished, legacy corporate facade often creates distance.
It really does.
It feels manufactured. It feels like it was routed through a PR department, sanitized by legal, and tested by focus groups before it ever reached the timeline. The modern consumer is highly cynical toward that level of polish.
Very cynical.
Whereas a present, evolving founder builds trust specifically through their transparency. They are showing you the rough drafts of their thinking.
And trust is no longer built through the projection of invulnerability. In the digital economy, trust is built through proximity and consistency.
I love that.
Being findable means lowering the friction of creation, so the audience actually has something tangible to connect with on a daily basis. If your standard is the museum exhibit, the friction required to produce that level of polish is so incredibly high that you will only produce content once a quarter.
Let me challenge this idea of presence over polish, though. Because isn't the pendulum swinging back slightly? We see people complaining about low-effort content, complaining about influencers who just turn on a camera and ramble. Doesn't striving for presence instead of polish run the risk of just becoming lazy? Doesn't the audience still demand quality?
That's a fair point, but lowering the operational friction does not mean lowering the intellectual value.
Okay.
Present does not mean careless. A brilliant, highly valuable insight typed out on a phone with a few typos is still a brilliant insight.
That's true.
It will perform better and build more trust than a mediocre, sanitized thought shot on a $50,000 R&D camera.
Right, because the substance is there.
Exactly. When you present an overly polished facade, you signal to the audience that there is no room for them in the narrative. You don't need their input, you don't need their feedback, because you already have it all figured out. It creates a hierarchical dynamic.
The audience feels like passive spectators in a theater, rather than active participants in a movement.
Exactly. By shifting the technical objective from polish to merely being present and findable, a founder accomplishes two massive operational goals.
Which are?
First, as we discussed, it invites the audience into the intellectual process, fostering deep parasocial bonds. Second, and perhaps more importantly for the founder's long-term stamina, it lowers the operational barrier to entry, making daily execution sustainable.
Yeah, you don't burn out.
Right. You do not need a production crew, a teleprompter, and 3 hours of lighting adjustments to be present. You just need a clear thought and a willingness to share it.
That shift is a massive relief for the nervous system. You don't have to put on the heavy armor of perfection every single morning.
No, you really don't.
Now that we have established that the technical goal is dynamic presence rather than static polish, we need to discuss the actual execution. Because understanding this conceptually on a strategy session is one thing, but sitting down at a keyboard on a Wednesday morning with decades of conditioned perfectionism firing in your brain is another.
It's the hardest part.
We need to explore the exact operational steps to execute this reset in real time.
The material is highly pragmatic on this front. A visibility belief reset is not about pretending you feel confident. This is a crucial distinction that separates actionable strategy from motivational fluff. It is a deliberate, strategic choice to adopt a functional belief that opens a door rather than closes it.
I really want to emphasize that phrase, not about pretending you feel confident, because the internet is absolutely saturated with toxic positivity and fake it till you make it hustle culture.
It is everywhere.
It tells founders, just hype yourself up, look in the mirror, beat your chest, and scream that you are a visionary genius until you believe it. The framework we are discussing explicitly rejects that approach.
It rejects it because manufactured confidence is neither scalable nor sustainable. The biological cost is just too high.
Exhausting.
It is. The text provides specific structural rewrites to bypass this. For example, shifting the internal narrative from, I don't have enough to say, to the highly practical directive, I only need one clear message today.
Oh, I like that.
Another rewrite involves shifting from the paralyzing thought, my audience won't care, to the service-oriented thought, someone needs to hear this now.
Let's analyze the mechanics of those specific rewrites. They are remarkably grounded. They aren't empty affirmations. They operate like practical, technical directives.
Yes, exactly.
When you change, I don't have enough to say, to I only need one clear message today, you are effectively scaling the task down to bypass the brain's threat response. You are moving from an overwhelming macro-level pressure, this idea that I must have a comprehensive, groundbreaking thesis on my entire industry figured out before I speak, down to an executable micro-level task.
Right.
Just one clear message today.
It is a process of scope reduction, and it plays directly into the neuroscience of habituation.
Super reduction.
Yes. When the scope of the expectation is infinite, like I must say everything perfectly and be universally lauded, the amygdala perceives the potential for social rejection as a massive threat, and the resulting action is paralysis.
Zero output.
Zero output. When the scope is restricted, I must say one true thing today, the threat level drops, and the brain allows the resulting action to be immediate.
So why is a practical, supportive belief so much more effective than trying to manufacture that fake confidence? Why does the structural reset actually result in published work over a year, whereas the fake till you make it approach usually results in rapid burnout?
It comes down to cognitive load and ego depletion. Fake confidence requires massive energy to maintain. It is a performance.
It really is an act.
Right. You have to actively suppress your imposter syndrome, you have to artificially inflate your ego, and you have to project a frequency that is completely misaligned with your true internal state.
Yeah.
That takes a tremendous amount of caloric and emotional energy. Eventually, you exhaust your cognitive reserves, which leads directly to inconsistency.
You see this all the time. A founder posts 3 highly produced, energetic videos in a week when they are hyped up on caffeine in a motivational seminar, and then they completely disappear for 6 weeks because their nervous system crashed from the performance.
Exactly. A structural belief reset, choosing a belief that is actively supportive instead of restrictive, requires zero emotional manufacturing.
Zero.
When you adopt the functional belief, I only need one clear message today, you don't need to feel like a titan of industry to execute that task. You don't need to be hyped up.
You can just be normal.
You can be tired, you can be unsure, you can feel small, but you can still identify one clear message and hit publish. It allows you to operate entirely regardless of your emotional state. It changes the parameters of the task from an emotional performance to a functional daily necessity.
It completely detaches your inherent worth from the action of posting. The action is just a daily requirement, like drinking water, reviewing financials, or checking your email.
Yes, exactly.
It is no longer a referendum on your value as a human being or your intelligence as a leader. It's just one message, today. And when these functional supportive beliefs are put into daily practice, the cumulative effect over time permanently alters the trajectory of a brand. Which brings us to the final culminating phase of this entire process.
The inside-out expansion of presence.
Yes.
The overarching summary of the mechanics we've been discussing is that small belief shifts change how easily you show up. When you rewrite the cognitive beliefs that restrict you, your physical presence in the market expands naturally. Visibility expands from the inside out.
Inside out. Let's synthesize this dynamic. Internal friction dictates external speed.
Yes.
It is a direct, one-to-one correlation. If a founder holds the belief that they need a perfect strategy before moving, that internal friction will cause them to overthink every detail, slowing their external speed to an absolute standstill.
Right.
If they hold the belief that they aren't ready, the friction will cause them to wait in the garage indefinitely.
Conversely, if they deliberately install the belief that visibility grows through presence, the internal friction drops to near zero.
Wow.
And when friction drops, the ease of showing up increases exponentially. Velocity is naturally achieved because the psychological brakes have finally been released.
Let's extrapolate on this timeline for a moment.
All right.
What happens to a brand mechanically and practically 6 months after a founder executes a true visibility belief reset? We talked about the micro story earlier, where the rhythm changed in a single week. But what does that compound into over half a year?
It's a massive transformation.
Like month 1, you are just proving to your nervous system that the sky doesn't fall when you post an imperfect thought. It is awkward, you feel exposed, but it is consistent.
Right. And then by month 2, the desensitization phase is complete. The anxiety subsides. The action of publishing has moved from a high-stakes, sweat-inducing event to a normalized routine. You are simply laying the bricks.
Being in the bricks.
By month 3, the most critical phase begins data aggregation. Because you have been consistently present, the market has started to respond. You now have quantitative and qualitative feedback loops.
Because you've been findable.
Exactly. You know what angles resonate with your target demographic. You know which formats your audience ignores entirely.
And crucially, because you are no longer attached to being flawless, you don't take the ignored posts as a personal failure or an attack on your intelligence. You just read them as neutral data.
Exactly.
Okay, the data shows they don't engage with text-heavy posts on Tuesday mornings. Got it. Adjusting format. Moving on.
By month 6, the compound interest of that presence is staggering. Consistent presence has generated a massive volume of data. That data has allowed you to refine and calibrate the message.
Yeah.
And that refined, highly calibrated message is what actually builds a massive loyal audience. The brand becomes established, authoritative, and deeply connected to its market. But every single metric of that 6-month success story traces back to the initial internal reset.
It really does.
None of it happens without rewriting the restrictive belief on day 1.
It is an incredible realization. We spend immense amounts of time, capital, and mental energy trying to build our brands from the outside in. We chase new platforms, we try to reverse engineer viral hooks, we hire consultants to build funnels.
We seek external validation from our peers before we launch anything.
Yes. We treat visibility as an acquisition. We think we can buy it. But the mechanics dictate that sustained visibility must flow from the inside out. It is a direct emanation of your internal permission structure.
Your audience is currently waiting for you to be findable. They're waiting for the insights, the frameworks, and the solutions you are holding hostage in your drafts folder.
Holding hostage, that's so true.
Your audience growth, your revenue potential, and your broader impact are currently trapped behind a door that is locked entirely by your own assumptions about readiness. Rewrite the belief, Scale down the scope of the expectation and the door opens. It is a mechanical certainty.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today as you look at your own brand and your own operational habits. We have talked extensively about the mechanics of momentum, the myth of perfection, and the psychology of self-sabotage. But let's look at the actual human cost of your silence.
The human cost?
If your audience truly requires you to be findable, if there are people out there struggling right now with a problem that your specific expertise can solve, then your silence is not just a clever defensive mechanism to protect your own ego. It is an active choice to withhold a necessary solution from someone who genuinely needs it today. Is your restrictive belief, your demand for absolute perfection before you speak, costing someone else their progress? Your visibility isn't just about your growth or your metrics. It's about their relief. Stop waiting for the wind tunnel to tell you the car is perfect. Drive it out onto the track. If you're ready to reset your visibility beliefs and expand your presence, visit 365 Freedom online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom Strategy session.